So hi everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Jasper and I am the festival coordinator for explorASIAN Festival, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Sujit Vaidya. How are you, Sujit?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining us. If you follow explorASIAN Festival, you'll probably recognize Sujit from our festival poster, which is up on transit shelters all over the city. So I thought maybe we could just start, Sujit, by you could telling us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. Hello, everyone who's watching. So my name is Sujit. I am an independent dance artist based here in Vancouver. I've trained in the Indian classical dance form called Bharatanatyam, which is one of several dance forms that exist in India, I suppose. And yeah, I pretty much create from that space. That's my formal background, and I still continue to train with my teacher in Chennai. And I work with several companies here in Canada and also some based out of the US, but mostly as a solo artist. And when I do company work, then of course it depends on what the work is. Like it could be a duet or a group production, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, essentially, I think Indian classical arts lend themselves more to like solo dance recitals, presentations, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, yeah, I would. Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So perhaps we could start first with the specific practice of yours, which is, and forgive my pronunciation, Bharatanatyam.
Bharatanatyam.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit about that?
For sure. So, like I said, it's a class. So it's a big question, but at the same time, I'm just trying to see how I can kind of put it in a nutshell.
Sure.
So this form originates in the southern part of India,
okay.
From a state called Tamil Nadu, and it is centuries old. And it has, in the present day, the way it is practiced is my engagement with it. Mm-hmm. It has a rich history. Basically, the form consists of two separate components. One is a pure dance and one is an expressive form. They blend into the whole form, which is known as Bharatanatyam. Mm-hmm. So some of the salient features I would say are like use of hand gestures or mudras, and very specific facial expressions, mm-hmm. To create narratives.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, go on. You were.
No, I mean, I think, yeah. And so it's specific to that region. And I think it was one of the first forms, if I'm not mistaken, from which stemmed other forms of classical dances in different regions of India.
Okay.
And so formally, I think around 7 or 8 forms are recognized throughout the Indian subcontinent.
I see, as sort of a different iteration of this first classical style of dance.
Exactly. And so, like, I mean, the musicality will be varied a little bit, and nuances will vary because mm-hmm. every region in India is one another in terms of language or etc. or expression, even, colloquial expression. And so I think the dance forms reflect all the patterns and nuances
of local cultures.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, fascinating. Now, you mentioned earlier that this style of dance lends itself more to solo performers versus ensembles. And I wonder why.
That's how it has been practiced traditionally. So it is essentially a solo art form. However, having said that, it also exists in forms called dance dramas. So mm-hmm. that's a different subgenre, I would say, of this form. But as it's usually practiced as a solo form. So there's one dancer on the stage accompanied by 4 to 5 musicians. That's the basic format of presentation. But now, even though, I mean, dance dramas, like I said, it's its own thing. So there, of course, you'll find more than one body on stage at the same time. But in a pure genre, this is, I would say it's not super new, but it's much newer than the practice of like group productions, etc.,
Mhm.
and more than one body on stage at the same time is quite a new concept.
It's okay. It's sort of a contemporary adaptation.
You could say that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, in some
Okay.
sense.
In some sense, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you got started in dance and like how it came into your life.
Yeah, so my journey actually has been super unconventional. I'm sure everybody says that, but like in my case, dance came much later into my life.
Mhm.
So my initial life was pretty much academically oriented. I was exposed to the form, as in I started looking at Bharatanatyam as a young child, even in school, etc. Like, I mean, there were some recitals, etc., that were happening. So I was aware that this form existed, and there were elements of the form that I was always drawn to.
Okay.
But I had never been formally trained. I hadn't had the exposure of a formal dance class in that space. But it had always stuck in my mind in some way, shape, form, especially the sounds. Like I remember all the sensory uh, memories that I have associated with the sound of like the drum, which is called the mridangam,
Mhm.
and then the smell of the fresh flowers that the dancers wore,
Huh.
and
Yeah.
like visual sights, like like red painted palms, etc. So
Mhm.
all of those, like I was mesmerized by that as a young child, and they left quite an impact on me. Um, but I started training only after I moved here to Vancouver, and so my first dance class was at the dance center
Mhm.
in the Davie Village, um, which would have been about, I think, 12 or 13 years back now. And yeah, that's how I started dancing. So how? Okay, so just to give you a little bit more
Yeah.
background, is I have a medical degree,
Oh
which
wow.
is which is what most of my life was, and as I was looking for residencies, I decided to pursue some hobbies um, or interests that had always stayed with me, and Bharatanatyam was one of those things. And so I, on a random thing, I just Googled to see if there were any schools in Vancouver that offered the dance form,
Yeah.
and I found one that's like 7 minutes walk from
Amazing.
where I live
Yeah.
downtown. I
Amazing.
was like, oh, okay, maybe this is some sort of a sign. Let's go do it. And so I still vividly remember my first class because there were like three of us in the class, me, a fully grown man,
Yep.
and like a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old girl. So it was super,
Amazing.
super strange. And that's how I started. And then in a few classes, I would say, like, I mean, in a month or two, I just, something about it had just grabbed me. And I knew that I needed to do this. And so I had to make a decision at that point because, like
Mhm.
I said, I was starting pretty late. That's very unconventional because most people will start at a very early age. And so if I wanted to do this at some level of, for the lack of a better word, professionalism or whatever it is,
Yeah.
um, I needed to invest like 200% of my energies into this.
Mhm.
So that was a hard decision to make. But that's pretty much how I started. And I graduated in 3.5 years, and then went on to India to continue training. And I still train with the same teacher that I train in India for all
I,
of these years.
I would love to talk about your teacher, Guru A. Lakshman. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's
Could you
exactly who he
tell
is.
us about Guru Lakshman?
Again, like, I mean, just a happy accident the way he came
Yeah.
into my life. So I got a mayor's award in 2010, I want to say, but
Yep.
from the city as emerging artist. And so I decided to go to Chennai to check out the dance form in its birthplace, in the place of
Mhm.
its origin. Um, December and January is what is called as a dance season that happens every year in India. And so
Mhm.
you get to see like a whole bunch of artists from all over the globe that come and share space and, showcase work. And so I remember the first year when I went there, it was two things. One of it was intimidating and inspiring, both at the same time, because it was just on such a different level than what I had experienced it up until that point.
Sure.
And so I knew that I needed to be immersed in the form in this space of its origin. But I had no clue, like, I mean, whom to pursue, etc. I had a vision. I would say I had a vision of how I wanted my dance to look. That was pretty much the only thing that I had to work with. And so as I was watching all of these different programs, there were a few students that just stood out, a few performers, I should say, whose presentations were like, oh my God, if only I could dance like that. Little did I know that these were all students of my present teacher. At that point, I had no reference to him at all. And one of my mentors who had met at a workshop in London introduced me to him on a whim, saying that, Sujit, you need to be here in Chennai and need to dance a lot more than just being with me for an hour and a half whenever she could. She was a very busy performer as well.
Okay.
And like this, I think you need to be immersed in it, and I'm just going to make a phone call. And so right in front of me, she called whoever. I didn't know who she was talking to. And she's like, I'm sending you a student, this and that and the other. I was like, okay, whatever. And so that's how, like, I mean, I was given his address and I showed up at his place.
Yeah.
And that's how my training with him began. And I only made the connection much later that, oh my God, I know you, because I've seen you perform. And I'm like, this is such a thing that, fate led me to this person.
That's what I was just going to say. It sounds like, the universe sort of funneled you towards Guru Lakshman.
That is so true. That I believe that, actually. Yeah.
And so, okay, that was around 2010, you said?
2010, yeah.
After you won the award. So, okay, so you've been studying with the Guru for about a decade now.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And how does that work? I mean, because if the Guru's in India and you're here, so how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. So the first few years I would spend a substantial amount of time in India learning, performing, all of those things of 5.5 months to 6 months.
Yeah.
So I had professional development grants, both from Canada Council and from the BC Arts Council, that helped me do that. And my teacher has a lot of students based in North America. Mm-hmm. So he comes, for the last few years, I've been seeing him in Georgia or in the Bay Area when he comes here to give workshops, which has been way more convenient.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much the same. It's very immersive. It becomes like a 2.5 to a month's process, depending on however long he's staying there. Yeah. And we get to share meals. Essentially, we're all living in that student's house.
An immersive experience, yeah.
It's very, very, so the olden days, there was a concept called the Guru Kulam. Guru as in the teacher, and Kulam as in his house or in the presence of the teacher. So the students and the teachers pretty much share the same space. You got up together, you ate meals together, you were dancing, you were talking dance. And so that's an experience that actually happens here in this part of the world for me. When I go to India, it's a different thing, because I'm renting a space by myself and I go to dance class, and it's a little bit more formal, as in, the formality of time, etc. Here it is super informal, and then there's dance conversations that happen, and that exchange of information, etc., is just so enriching.
I imagine
my training. Yeah, sorry.
I imagine both of those environments have their benefits too, right? Have the more informal environment, I'm sure. I don't know. Maybe you could talk about that a bit, like the difference in those environments.
So firstly, I mean, I have to talk about the difference between India and here, because learning the dance form in India, especially in Chennai, I have to be very specific, in that particular city, just by virtue of osmosis, I would say, because the dance and music is in the air in Chennai.
Yeah.
You cannot escape it. And in fact, it exists in a very informal space in most houses. Like, most people learn to either sing or dance. I should say it's cultural, I suppose.
Sure.
In that particular state. And so you cannot escape it, even in like mundane conversations, etc. Right? You're listening to the sounds, you're breathing the air, and how a dance class happens in India is also pretty informal. So there's no concept of time. You show up at like whenever he asks you to come. So let's say my teacher will say, yeah, today come at 8 o'clock. So I'm all prepared, ready to go dance. But
Yeah.
by the time it's time to actually dance, it
Yeah.
could be noon.
Right.
And so you found yourself sitting in class and just kind of, one was bursting with energy to just kind of go move, etc. And then by the time it's your time, it's like, oh my god, I'm so tired just sitting.
Right.
So it was very challenging for me the first time around. For the first month or so, I'm like, what is happening? I've traveled like half the globe to learn this dance form, and I find myself sitting in class. Little did I realize that in all of that sitting, I was learning so much, because I wasn't just sitting.
Right.
There were other students that were coming in.
Okay.
I was looking at their class. I was listening to him give them directions, instructions. I was listening to what he was singing for them. This happened later, of course. I started to tap and, kind of help him take classes, etc., sing for other students. When I came back from my first experience in India, and I started to unpack all of what had happened in my own space in the studio, I was amazed to find out what all my body had learned without moving. For me, where did that come from? Like, this is something I've been trying, and it's eluded me forever. I had no idea what the whole nuance was and stuff, and suddenly I was doing it.
It's like
And
osmosis, like you said.
suddenly, and without me being formally taught that.
Yeah.
And so that was so exciting for me, and I realized how much one learns without actually having to formally being
Yeah.
taught.
It was sort of passively absorbed. What you just described sounds very much like someone learning a new language just by being in a new place where the language is spoken.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that too, because even languages are different, right? in every province in India, you speak different languages. And so the language spoken in Chennai, Tamil, is completely alien to me as well. I don't understand it.
Sure.
But then picking up the language also is the same kind of space in how I picked up the dance, etc., in that space. In the informality that happens in this part of the world, the dance class actually is super formal, because here it's very punctuality oriented, right?
Sure.
Because he sees all of these students, and there's a different way of being. So if you say the class is going to start at 9 o'clock and I have a 9 to 11:30 a.m. class, that's happening between 9 to 11:30.
Yeah.
So that's actually, even my teacher, that's a switch for him, because he has to do the switchery to say, oh my god, yes, people are so particular here about it. I'm like, I know their lives are busy here. You don't have all the luxury to kind of just sit and be. What happens is, the student that he visits, I usually am parked at the same student's space. So outside of the class, we have a lot of conversations. We have a lot of talks about dance, etc. And I find that also is immensely helpful, and in a very different way. Yeah.
So we were talking about language earlier, just a second ago, and I was reading your website, and I noticed that you refer to yourself as a translator at times. I'm sorry, not translator, interpreter.
Yes.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could talk about, because I wonder if you could talk about how interpretation factors into your practice.
Yeah. So everything one does, I find, at least in my personal experience, is an interpretation of something. It's not absolute. So let me talk through the perspective of my solo performances, of my solo dance work. Usually the choreographies have been handed down over generations. They've been perhaps modified by, the teachers, etc., to suit their particular nuances, etc. And then when they're handed over to me, it is, I influence them, or I infuse them with my eye or my training, etc. And so for me, I think it is all an interpretation in that sense, number one. Number two is, if I'm not the choreographer, then I'm interpreting what the choreographer is asking of me, right? So it is your vision. It is you are envisioning something and I'm the vessel through which that interpretation is happening. And so I have to understand exactly what it is that you're asking me to do, and then I have to make myself understand that, and then produce it, and then come to some sort of consensus with the person who is visualizing it, to make sure that there is some harmony in both, like, I mean, the way I am executing it or interpreting it, and the way you're trying to place it on my body. So I find that word actually fits everything that I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you are a choreographer as well as a dancer, and I wonder how that is, that like a natural progression for a lot of dancers to sort of start dancing and then move into choreography, or how do those, I mean, how do you find your role as a choreographer differs from your role as a dancer in terms of trying to express ideas?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think it is a natural progression, but I can't be speaking for all dancers, right? Because everybody has their own different journeys, and I don't think everyone has the need to make their own work, or to, you know. For me, what I found was, so I do both, right? Like, I mean, I will make my own work, but at the same time, I also dance in other people's work. I'm very selective about the work that I take on with other companies, etc. We have to have matched visions, and I would say it's more of a collaboration at this point. But yeah, choreography was a natural progression because I found that I had things to say through the dance form, and just the questions that I was asking myself, as in, what am I bringing to the form? What am I doing that is not already, that does not already exist? How am I making myself a vessel to tell stories from my own personal experience? And so I found that I didn't really find much of that in the traditional repertoire. And what I needed to say, or what I wanted to say, and what was so personal to me, was something that I understood best. And so I needed to figure out ways to put it out there. So that was my impetus to start making work. I haven't made a lot of work outside of the traditional realm, but I'm interested. And the last work that I made was quite well received, and has actually encouraged me to kind of explore that dimension more. It felt liberating, I should say, because it wasn't about making work for a specific gaze. It was just wanting to say something that was coming from a very personal space without putting on the pressure of how it's going to be received. That was freeing for me. Usually,
very freeing.
That was freeing, and that was really exciting. And finding the tools, and also exciting to know that the language that I've learned, or the form that I've trained in, was such a good base to kind of dive into, like, as a toolbox to create from. And I didn't really need to look outside of it much at all to invest in other languages to say what I needed to say. So that was also, because that's really important to me, because I'm only trained in Bharatanatyam. I haven't trained in any other form. So to stay true to the groundedness of the form is special, because the form is special. I don't call it Bharatanatyam because I don't want to label it. I don't call it contemporary work because I don't want to label it in that box either. So I would say what I make, or what I will make in the future, perhaps, for the lack of a better word, is experimental.
Yes.
But the language, or even the soundscape that I use, is all very, very familiar to me. Like it's all from my dance form, or my background.
I see. I wanted to talk about a quote from your website, if we could. So here's the quote. Using Bharatanatyam as a language, his work off-center draws from introspection around his experience of disconnect as a contemporary gay man, immersed in learning an ancient art form. He finds it important and urgent to question the narrative and relevance of non-inclusive traditional ideas. I thought that was a very powerful statement, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on it, sort of because what I get from that is that there can be a tension between studying a more a classic art form as a contemporary gay man, which is it just struck me that there could be a tension there, and I think that might be what you're getting at.
Exactly. Yes, that's absolutely. And I was feeling that for the longest time. So the reason why I stopped going to India as often as I would in the beginning part of my training, in the initial part of my training, is because these questions were coming up a lot for me. I was dancing it. I was doing it in a, I had the chops. I had everything that was accessible to me, and I could have kept going on in that direction.
Yeah.
Which is perceived as like the mainstream kind of way to make it. And I'm using all of these in air quotes because who knows what that means, right? But those are formulas that are kind of how you're perceived. I think that's what it is more than anything else, how people perceive you as being successful in a space. So in that traditional space, there is this one way of being and this one way of kind of navigating it.
Yes.
As I was on that journey and I was on the right path, I knew somewhere along the way that there was a lot of things that were not sitting right for myself.
Okay.
And the more I tried to push those away, the more urgently they came up for me.
Yeah.
So I knew I needed space from the familiarity of it all and just to break away from a perceived comfort zone and put myself in a space where I was almost starting from scratch, because I needed to kind of just let these thoughts rise and see what happened from them. And so at the dance center, they offer a project called 12 Minutes Max, which is a platform for emerging choreographers. And so you're asked to make 12 minutes or less of choreography.
Okay.
That was like a non-intimidating platform for me to kind of like, sit and see what's happening in this space.
Yeah.
And that's where Off Center came from. And so that dichotomy of me having all of these questions as like, I say on my website, as a gay man who lives in today's times in this part of the world,
yes,
and dancing repertoire from there's a lot of beauty in, I'm not knocking any of it, right? I mean, there's beautiful like lyricity and composition and poetry and all of that is all present there, but it wasn't addressing many concerns, many questions, many things that I was feeling personally. And I felt that it would be powerful for me to draw from my own personal experiences and kind of see how that translated, percolated. So having to navigate both boats, that's dichotomy, and that's what my piece kind of reflects about, because there is both those forms fit me, and both of those forms, I mean, I'm not rejecting any one space.
No.
But how do I try and make some associations or connections within that space and see what comes from there?
Well,
does that make sense? Sorry, I know.
No, it absolutely does. I feel like that's where your role as interpreter comes in, right? You're taking useful things from different practices in different parts of the world and different ideas, and you're making them your own. That's what I gathered from that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So speaking of the dance center, you were scheduled to perform this month with the dance center. Of course, that was part of exploration and it got canceled. But you're also a member of another exploration partner. It's a dance company called Co Erasga.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about your work with those folks?
Yeah. So Co Erasga is the artistic director Alvin Tolentino. He is like a phenomenal choreographer. Filipino Canadian, who is just, first of all, an amazing person. And so I was part of one of his latest work called Passages of Rhythm.
Yes, that's right.
Where he's made 3 duets with artists from 3 different genres, one of them being me, a Bharatanatyam practitioner. There's a duet with him and a flamenco dancer, Cassandra Flamenco, also based in Vancouver, and a voice artist, Gabrielle Darmo, who's from Montreal. And so his whole idea of this exploration was to exchange information, I suppose, between, like he's a modern dancer, Alvin himself. And yeah, so his company's made many works throughout like years or however long, he's been making work for. And it was this exchange of ideas between his form and my form, and his form and flamenco, and his form and the voice that Gabriel brings into it. And he'd made this 60-minute piece that we were supposed to be touring in May.
That's right.
Yeah. So of course, all of that is on hold for now. But so, what was your question again?
Well, I was just curious about the company. I just wanted to hear about what they're all about and how you're working with them.
Yeah, he's based in Vancouver. And so the first time Alvin and I collaborated was for a project called 10 by 10 by 10. This happened in 2010. Yeah. And this was for the 10th anniversary of the Dance Center.
Okay.
And so 10 choreographers were commissioned by the Dance Center to make 10 minutes of work. And so Alvin had chosen me. I was so brand new to the dance scene at that point.
Yeah.
So that was a point of reference to each other. And so we tried to kind of make a language using hand gestures, etc., for that particular work. And we both knew that at some point we really needed to collaborate and take it forward. And I think that culmination comes through in Passages, which was 2018. So all those years, 8 or 9 years later, we got a chance to work together and make this duet.
That's great. Well, I suppose now that live performance is on hold for the time being. So I wonder if you've sort of, what your thoughts are around how you can adapt what you do to this sort of new reality that we're in. Have you made any plans, or do you have any ideas that you're working on right now?
Honestly, I don't know. Like I said, this is my first Zoom meeting.
Right.
I have just, I don't know, because I have been asked to do some work online, etc. I haven't been able to negotiate that for myself. Number one, I don't have the space.
Sure, yeah.
And the studios just opened this week, and so therefore that wasn't a luxury at all. And secondly, my body just wasn't wanting to dance, if that makes any sense.
No, I get that. You have to you do the work when you're ready to do the work, when you have something to say.
Yeah, and something so familiar that was that is such a routine in my life, to have to go without, I didn't want to engage with it on a superficial level. And therefore, I decided to just step away from it, because any thought of even wanting to dance and for my body to want to kind of be expansive just created anxiety.
Yeah.
So and so I'm also refraining from making any concrete plans, because everything is still so uncertain going forward.
Yeah.
Luckily, most of the projects that got cancelled are on hold. Nothing has been cancelled.
Right.
Some dates have been tentatively proposed, and I'm not putting my eggs in that basket either, because one doesn't know how the fall is going to look, or how the rest of the year is going to manifest. Yeah. So I don't have any plans. I don't know. I'm just happy that the studio spaces have opened up, and now my body gets to move again, and just the luxury of having space to move is what I'm focused on at the moment.
That's great. I'm so with you on what you said earlier about not wanting to dance. It's not the right time. You have to listen to your body, and you have to listen to what your soul is telling you about the work. And there's nothing worse than trying to make art for the wrong reasons, and it being disingenuous, or it will cause anxiety. So I fully
and also from my past experiences, I've learned that just sitting observing, you're dancing, you're learning things that unpacks in its own time, in its own space. One doesn't know, and so it's different for different people. Some people find it necessary, which is also one way of, however one needs to deal with it. Exactly like you said, listen to your body, because my body is being loud and saying, I don't, it just doesn't feel like.
Yeah. And it's like you said, you may not be dancing in this moment, but you're still working. You're still unpacking things, processing things, rendering
Creating.
ideas. It's all happening. Yeah, I'm very much the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Sujit, I really appreciate you spending time with me today. It's been lovely talking to you and hearing all about your practice and how it started. And you know, I hope, we really hope at explorASIAN that if things are somewhat normal next year, that we could have you back to perform like we had originally planned.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love that. Thank you again for like even inviting me. And this was nice. This was actually a good way of, kind of introducing me to this virtual world.
But this virtual, yeah, no, it was a lovely conversation, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in real life when this is all over.
Same.
Okay, take care, Sujit.
You too. Thanks. Bye.